Okay, hey, how are you? Here they are. He is the editor-in-chief of Reason magazine, Matt Welch. Hey, Matt, great to have you back here. She's a Democratic strategist and CEO of Impact Strategies, Angela Rye. Welcome to our show.
Thank you.
And he's a staff writer for The New Yorker, Adam Gopnik. Read you all the time. Always enjoy it. Adam. All right, remember to follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and send us your questions for tonight's overtime so we can answer them after the show on YouTube. Okay, so I think the word of the week was politicize. I heard it a lot. We certainly heard it yesterday from the president talking about guns, but I think it was also relevant. The Planned Parenthood meetings that were, or hearings that were going on in Congress. And also, I think the Benghazi hearings might be a little political. But let's start with the guns and then throw it all on the table together. I heard the president say two things I've never heard a president say. First, he said we should politicize this issue. He said this is a political choice we make to allow this to happen every couple of months. And then he said prayers are not enough. Wow. A president saying prayers are not enough?
It was a brave thing, and he's been a while getting there. I think the reason that the president said that, Bill, is exactly because this is one of those problems where we know the solution. We see those parents grieve, we see those kids dying, we read about cell phones ringing still in the pockets of dead kids because their parents are still trying to reach them because they've heard about the shooting, and we know what to do about it. We know from this huge body of social science and research that gun control works on gun violence as effectively as antibiotics work on bacterial infections. If we had gun laws like the gun laws...
I don't know about that.
Which is to say, not perfectly, but overwhelmingly, and almost all of the time.
Overwhelmingly?
Yes.
Well,
and if we had gun laws...
This shooter yesterday didn't have assault weapons. He didn't have any weapon that the Democrats want to outlaw.
He had 17...
He passed any background check that you can imagine, like most mass shooters would. They pass background checks because they generally haven't committed crimes in the past.
But Matt, this is exactly like saying, you see, we give sick kids aspirin and they don't get better. That proves medicine doesn't work. What we do know from the experience of Canada, what we know from the experience of Australia, where they had a horrific mass shooting, and then they cut down, they brought in really stringent and effective gun control laws, and there hasn't been a single mass shooting ever since.
That's not what even the liberals are talking about in this country, doing what they did in Australia. That's the difference, is that they're still not getting at the root of the problem, the Second Amendment.
Well, but the Second Amendment, I don't think is a root problem. You have to remember,
Bill.
Yes, you have to remember, Bill, that the interpretation, the radical misreading of the Second Amendment that we live under now, which says the Second Amendment guarantees rights to individuals to own guns, is extremely recent. It only took up 7 years ago in Scalia's Heller decision. Before that, for almost 200 years, the consensus of constitutional scholars on all sides and of the Supreme Court was that the Second Amendment, which after all begins talking about a well-regulated militia, referenced a well-regulated militia, that it only protected the rights of the states to form militias. Now, you may disagree with that, but that was the consensus view until 7 short years ago. And all we need to do is to have the sanity.
And before that, no one was dying of gun violence.
No one was dying with the same regularity of gun massacres as they are today.
So let me just chime in here. I think the first thing we have to acknowledge is that there have been almost 1,000 mass shooting deaths since Sandy Hook, and that's December 2012. We have a major problem on our hands, and so what we need to think about is what the president means by politicizing this. This isn't a partisan exercise. To politicize something in the terms that he's using it, it is to ensure that we're using the public policy veins of Congress, of executive orders to make something happen. We cannot afford to do that anymore. People are dying. He even challenged the press yesterday to compare what's happened in terms of terrorist attacks and deaths by terrorist attacks versus gun violence in this country. Gun violence is overwhelmingly the cause.
And people, that's what I thought was different. You don't often hear a politician in America say, hey, it's back on you people. Politicians say the people are perfect. If only we could live up to their standards, blah, blah, yada, yada, bullshit, bullshit. He was like, you know what, I can't do this all alone.
Right.
He actually said, you have to be a one-issue candidate on gun control. That's even too far for me.
Michael Bloomberg tried that this past election cycle. He created a group that was going to fund single-issue candidates on this, and they pretty much failed across the board. Michael Bloomberg big gun controller, let's remember what applied gun control looks like. Stop and frisk was an anti-gun program. It was. That was the goal of it, is to disarm people in poor communities. In the federal system, if you are in the federal system for gun crime, 47% of them are black. These are things that you have to think about when you're giving police more power. To your point about sort of what magic wand we can wave to make this better, the actual policy on the table is usually, in the wake of these shootings, is let's expand background checks.
Because that's the only thing they can get passed.
Okay, but let's talk about...
And they can't even get that passed.
But let's talk about that policy of background checks. There are two problems. Wait a second. There's two problems with it. One is that the mass shooters will pass the background checks, which we talked about before. But the second problem is a Bill Maher problem, which is to say, if we suddenly... we have a lot of Bill Maher problems. If we suddenly...
I'm a stoner. I never shot anybody.
That's a problem.
That's a problem?
Yes, because every single federal background check says you can't have a gun if you have used a controlled substance.
Well, I'm going to have to give my gun up then.
Exactly. No, that's the thing. What you're going to do is you're going to disenfranchise people on purpose from Second Amendment rights of owning a gun if you have been a farm worker, if you've committed a nonviolent felony, and if you've smoked pot.
Let me
so know that.
One more thing before we move on from guns, which is that I hear all the time when these things happen, it's a mental health issue, and of course they're talking about individuals, and of course any individual who does this is mentally ill. They don't seem to ever talk about the collective mental aberration that...
Every country, every nation has some core irrationality that it seems unable to escape. And what you're saying, Matt, is basically it's a council of despair. These kids are going to continue to die. We're going to continue to see these regular massacres because, well, what are we going to do about it? The overriding reality is that we have this irrational fixation on guns. We have this sense that guns
love of guns.
A love of guns.
And I want to show you this street sign I saw a couple of years ago. It was in the news. I grew up not far from Wayne, New Jersey. It says, "Warning, if you hit one of these kids because you are speeding, you will not need a lawyer." Picture of a gun. Right. That's the problem right there. That's the American mindset. Right. Guns are awesome. They fix all problems just like in movies.
Right. Guns are this incredibly potent symbol of autonomy for a lot of Americans, and I understand that. The problem is it's not an effective form of autonomy because the one thing we know is that possession of a gun makes it much more likely you're going to kill someone in your family than you're ever going to confront an intruder or a bad guy. It all exists in the realm of fantasy.